Good evening and welcome. Thanks so much for being here tonight. We know that there are quite a few other events taking place of consequence in the athletic and political worlds. I don't have a score for you, but maybe later on tonight we can do that. So I really appreciate your deciding to be here. I promise that you won't regret your decision. Even as a native Oaklander, go A's, married to a staunchly pro-union Dem, I know that you will gain tonight from our honorees and absorb into your very soul something that will have much longer lasting meaning than one division series game or one vice presidential debate. Now, we're always very delighted to bring successful examples of lawyers who are dedicated to serving the public and advancing justice to our community. But tonight's award recipients are really something. It's truly an honor to have both Judge Wald and David Sapp with us tonight. I have many, many special welcomes and thank yous to extend, but I was asked to convey the apologies of a disappointed John and Terry Levin for not being able to join us tonight. For those of you who are new to our community, there really is a John and Terry Levin, and you saw them there. We certainly wish they could be here, and we definitely thank them in their absence. For the Levin's generosity has really placed us at Stanford in the enviable position of having one of the very few endowed law school centers in the country, whose entire focus is to support the public service goals of our students and to support the expansion and growth of the public interest legal field itself. I also want to acknowledge the staff of the center, Anna Wang, Nagar Katarai, Betsy De La Vega, Titi Liu, and is Mark Gonzalez here, a new member of our staff, for all of your help putting tonight together, as well as Krishna Haryani, who's been an incredible volunteer with us, making sure that we're covering all of the details for both tonight and for our Human Rights Symposium. So tonight there are actually many firsts to acknowledge and celebrate. I'll shortly invite to the stage our new dean, Liz McGill, to participate in her first of very many Public Service Awards events. And we're also honored by the presence of leading human rights advocates from Kenya, France, Israel, China, Egypt, Malaysia, the list goes on and on, who will participate in our Advancing Gender Equality Through Human Rights Symposium that starts tomorrow and goes through Saturday. If I could ask all the symposium panelists who are here to stand, and if I could ask everybody to join us in giving them a welcome to Stanford. Another first is that we have a new staff member, Titi Liu, who's directing our international public interest initiatives. And it's through her hard work and her vision that brings our special guest to us tonight, and that is really launching this symposium and a whole new area for the Levin Center. So welcome, Titi, to your first event. But my most special welcomes are, of course, for Judge Wald, Dave Sapp, and his parents who came out from Miami. Thank you very much. His esteemed colleagues from the ACLU of Southern California, thank you for being here. And the amazing Rubin family, Miles, Nancy, and their son Todd, who, of course, helped create these awards. And as you will hear much more about shortly, helped launch our LRAP program. Now, Susan Plum, I'm closing. Susan Plum, the head of the Skadden Fellowship Foundation, calls those of us who were in her first class of fellows her firstborn. And I started my work here at Stanford in the summer of 2003, and I did work with third-year students who comprised the class of 2004 and became quite close to some of them. But I will admit that I think of the class of 2005 as my firstborn. And it wasn't just that we started a journey together in many ways, I learning about the law school and learning what they needed, and they sharing so much of their experience with me. It was that there really were some just incredible all-stars in that class. who were dedicated to public interest. And one of its all-time all-stars was David Sapp. I would say from the minute I got to know him, he actually helped to hire me. He was on the student panel that interviewed me. I knew that I was in the presence of someone really quite special. I knew from my conversations with him and the way that he grappled with the struggles of public interest lawyering and the complexities of staying connected to community while serving broader goals and using strategies that sometimes could seem separate from community, that he was really going to make a difference. I have a special message from Judge Myron Thompson, who, when he heard about this award, sent this quote, and he wanted me to read it to you. David, I am so proud of you. I have known many people who talk about doing the right thing, but you are that all too rare one who not only talks about doing the right thing, but does it. And with your all, fearlessly and with a deep commitment. And most importantly, with long, long hours of hard work, which I still appreciate. You, as they say, walk the walk. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in his letter from a Birmingham jail that injustice everywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. David, you embody what Dr. King sought to inspire with these noble words. It is as if they were written as a personal testament to the good that you have done, are doing, and will do. He sends his congratulations. I think those of us who have known and worked with David and gotten to know him would also know about him one thing that Mark Rosenbaum wrote in his nomination of Dave, that Dave makes lasting connections to the heart. So David, I'm very proud of you, and I'm deeply honored that our connection is to the heart, and I truly hope it will be lasting. Now, let me invite our wonderful new dean, Liz McGill, to the stage, who in her brief time here has already brought a tremendous thoughtfulness and vitality to our public interest community and work. Dean McGill.
Thanks, Diane. I want to first not roll off the stage. Note to future speakers, this rolls. I first want to welcome you to this wonderful event. I know that for me, this is going to be one of the highlights of my year as dean and in future years, because I've heard about this dinner in the past years, and I know it's going to be inspirational for me every year and make me more excited about being at Stanford Law School. So each year, as you know, we gather together to celebrate our accomplishments in public service, which are really exceptional, and to recognize two extraordinary individuals who have worked in the law to advance the public good. I think this awards dinner is always going to be providing me inspiration, and I hope to you, because it reminds us of two things. One is that a single individual who has a lot of skill and talent and works hard can, in fact, make a huge difference in the lives of many other people. And as you hear about the award recipients tonight, you're going to see that illustrated. And the second reason for me is that it's going to remind me, and I hope you, of our obligation to constantly seek opportunities to serve the public good in some capacity, given the privileges we have as lawyers. So you're going to hear both about and from our award recipients very soon, and I don't want to steal any thunder. I have another privilege tonight, which is to introduce a very special friend of the law school. That is Mr. Miles Rubin. Miles is a 1952 graduate of the law school. He's been an engaged alum and leader since that time. He had an illustrious career as an attorney and a businessman, and he has all of his life been active in philanthropic causes. That is also true of his wife, Nancy, who has devoted much of her time as well to incredibly worthy causes. In 1989, Miles and Nancy took a step that would have, I think, a significant effect on the subsequent history of the legal profession. That year, they established the Miles and Nancy Rubin Loan Assistance Repayment Program at Stanford. This was one of the first of its kind in the country. It was then and remains the most generous loan assistance repayment program in the country. Every one of our peer schools has now copied this program. We did it first because of the Rubins, but as a result of what they did, other schools followed, and that's why I think it's fair to say that it had a very significant effect on the legal profession. As you know, this program assists graduates who are pursuing public service in their loan repayments. The program now, Diane tells me, has 180 students receiving awards. In the last 5 years, the payments have almost doubled. They've increased to nearly $2.3 million a year. I know that many of you here tonight have benefited or are hoping to benefit in the future from this program. So I say that I think the Rubins really did change the legal profession, and I don't think that's exaggerating the case, because everyone else has now copied this program, and there's no doubt at all that through programs like our program and other law schools' programs, there are more lawyers able to work to serve the public good and public interest and public service than there would be without this program. It was a very visionary thing to do, and we are forever grateful for their generosity. Let me mention one more thing about Miles Rubin before he comes up here to present the award. The award he presents tonight is an award that bears his name, as you may have noticed. In 2008, his children, John, Kim, Richard, and Todd, established this award in his name to recognize his dedication to our alumni who use the law to promote positive social change. Maybe I'm just speaking as a parent, as well as the Dean of Stanford Law School, but I can think of no better tribute to Miles Rubin or to this law school than to have his own children decide that this was a wonderful way to honor him. So, Miles, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. There is truly nothing that could possibly... Hi, Tricia. How are you this evening? Good to see you. There is nothing that could mean more to me than to be identified with the public interest programs at Stanford University. Far more than any honor I might achieve in business. Stanford is home to me in many ways. And the secret is that I really got far more out of it than I'm putting back in. My life would have been very different. It certainly would not be meaningful to me, my wife, my children, had I not come to Stanford. That may sound like an exaggeration. One could say, well, one school is like another, but they're not. And one faculty is like another, but they're really not. And I'm pleased that the loan repayment program, which many universities have now, don't have the thoughtful administration that the Stanford faculty has put into it, because for us, we didn't have to do much. We thought about it, thought it was important, and helped to fund it. But it's the administration of the fund and the careful way that it is administered and the interrelationship between the LRAP program and the faculty and the students that means so much. So it's not important that Stanford was the first, if in fact it was the first, or even the most generous. It's a program that really reaches out to touches people in a very meaningful way. It's also a pleasure for me to be here with people I know from the faculty. Deborah Rhodey and I got a chance to speak, and Michael, who has mentored, I think, a few of my children through Stanford, and Larry Marshall, and Dean McGill. It was a pleasure to meet you today. And as we said today, we've known a lot of deans. It goes back to Carl Spaeth, who I was never able to beat in dominoes, and I did it in golf, but never in dominoes. So Stanford does mean a lot to me. And it is like coming home. It's sort of maudlin to say that, but for me it's like coming home again. I think to where I'm active now, which a lot of my life is spent in China now, and I think if I were to talk to my compatriots in China about the public interest program here at Stanford, it would be very remote from their everyday thinking and behavior. But also, one has to remember that Stanford's come a long way. In the late 40s, early 50s, when I was here, there really was not any emphasis on public interest at the school. And I mark the greatness of the school in a great way, in a meaningful way, with its commitment to public interest. Tonight, we are going to recognize a distinguished career. Now, it sounds strange to talk about a distinguished career for someone who graduated Stanford in 2005, but you see, the world is changing. Everything is speeding up, even distinguished careers. David Sapp is, if not unique, he is pretty sui generis. He has had a distinguished career. He's defined his life by public service. And I think for those who know David, and I just actually met him recently, public service is the sine qua non of his life, of his career. You know, the poet said that there's a divinity that shapes what we do, that shapes our ends. But that really isn't so. Each man makes, and woman, I'm going way back, there were no women in our law school class. So each man and each woman makes their own life. They you their own life. And external circumstances may affect them, but in many ways that, to me, has always been sort of an excuse for not getting out and doing it yourself. To say, well, life is going to decide it for me. You know, the times will shape who I am. And David is a man who I believe will shape his times, not be shaped by the times. I was thinking that we talk about being called to the bar. I was wondering, you know, what was that about? But it is a calling. And I think in this area of the law, in public interest, it's really a calling, almost in the sense of a religious calling. It's something that one does because of something maybe greater than yourself, but very much a part of your inner being. I think those who are great in public interest have it within them. Yes, the law school can hone their skills, and make them more adept at what they do. But in public interest, it's you're in a core or it isn't. And public interest is David's life. It's a passion for him. It's a moral calling. And it's something, as I said, that is almost spiritual. The times are such, and the needs are such, and the resources are so few, that a public interest program at Stanford might say it affects very few people at the school. How many students are in public interest? But that program can shape what happens in the world. As you said, you know, individuals who really care can make a difference. I've seen it throughout my life. It's extraordinary what one person can do if they have the commitment and they have the soul and they have the ability. So I was told that at this advanced stage of my life, I should not try and pick up the award. Now, whether that was through fear that I would drop it or that I make off with it, I don't know. But it is something I want to present to David. Where are you sitting, David? Hi. I'd like you to come up if you can. David has, in many ways, graced the school with his commitment to service. And we're all proud of you. And we know that in the years to come, we will look back and say, he was one of the fellows who broke the way through and made a change. So one of these is for you. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the kind words. I'm really glad my parents are here. I know my dad enjoyed it, and I know my mom believed every word of it. So I'm truly honored to receive this award. I met yesterday with a group of Stanford students, and we had a career chat, which also I agree is somewhat odd to think about a career 7 years after graduation. But one of the things that came up in the course of our conversation is I commented on how lucky I was to be where I was and how the opportunities that I had fell into place. And one of the students asked what was really a tremendous question, which is, well, if it's just about luck, what should I do? And I think I want to correct that. I'm very blessed, but none of this happened by happenstance. And it's by no means random because so many people have helped me to be where I am and have opened doors and been advocates for me and pushed me and challenged me. And so I want to thank those people and spend a little time saying thank you. First, I'd like to thank my family, my parents, Mary and Stephen Sapp, who are here. Obviously, I wouldn't be here literally without them, but they know more than anyone else that I would not be who I am without their love and support, so thank you. I want to thank my brother, Eric, older brother, who pushed me literally and metaphorically, and has always supported me and said that I shouldn't just be the little brother in the family. I want to thank my grandparents, LJ and Lottie Sapp and Mary Manley, who were tremendous examples of how to live a good life filled with love. I want to thank members of my extended family, which has been so important to my life and has helped shape the values. And finally, I want to thank my wife, Sarah, who was so disappointed not to be able to be here. And really, the only reason why this isn't a perfect night is that she isn't here to share it with me. I next want to thank Stanford, both the school and the people who make it special. There have been so many mentors, professors, and staff members throughout, and in particular, Diane Chen, Bob Weisberg, Michael Wald, Michelle Alexander, Peggy Stevenson, and of course, Pam Carlin, who've really pushed and supported me and opened doors for me throughout my career. I want to thank also alumni and others who have been so interested and invested in the public interest program here at Stanford. The Rubin family, thank you so much. As I said earlier today, I would not be able to do what I am doing without your support. I also want to thank my classmates and the members of the Stanford public interest community. It's sometimes hard, and knowing that there are other people out there who support you and are doing what you're doing makes it a little bit easier. I next want to just thank some people in my professional life. Mark Rosenbaum, in particular, who nominated me, and Larry Tribe, who supported the nomination. Thank you for what you said. It means particularly a lot, Mark, coming from you. I want to thank my colleagues, Brooks Allen and others at the ACLU of Southern California. Our mission is to protect and defend the Constitution, and in particular the Bill of Rights, and I love doing that. I want to thank Lewis Pitts, who is my supervisor at Legal Aid of North Carolina, and whose motto, "Have writ, will sue," inspired me to be fearless on behalf of my clients. And I want to thank Judge Raymond Fisher and Judge Myron Thompson, whose care and faithfulness to the rule of law have really shaped me as an attorney. Finally, I want to thank my clients and the allies that I work with. We couldn't do anything without our clients. They're the ones whose rights are at stake and who take risks when they step forward to be advocates. And just as one example, KCA, who's one of the clients that I represented in a lawsuit related to a juvenile probation facility, who spent enough time in detention that he earned enough credits to graduate from that facility, but couldn't read his diploma. He stepped forward and said, yes, I want to be a plaintiff in this case, even though he knew it wouldn't help him because he'd already left. But he did it because he wanted to make sure that no one else went through what he did. There are clients like him that all of us work with, and for the students here will work with, and that's what this is all about, and so I want to thank them also. The final thing that I want to do is it was suggested that I pass along a word of wisdom to the current students here at Stanford in the public interest program. And what I think I'd like to do is just reflect on a quote that's been very meaningful to me. The prophet Micah told the nation of Israel to seek justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly before God. I can't really think of a better motto for finding a meaningful public interest career. First, seeking justice. That's kind of self-explanatory, right? There's so much injustice out there in so many areas, and all you have to do is pick the area that makes you righteously indignant when you see it and go for it. The second, to love kindness. This profession is unfortunately structured around conflict, especially in litigation. But I don't think that we need to let it consume us. Whether it's building kind and respectful relationships with colleagues that can help us get through the day and find the support when things get tough at work. Or in particular, whether it's being kind to our clients, where even if there's nothing we can do to help, or even if we try to help and fail, that we tried and listened to what they had to say can make all the difference. And finally, the third point, which is to walk humbly. I think that there are so many amazing people out there who are doing this work and who aspire to do this work. And one of the things that, as I probably just noted when I opened by thanking people, no one gets anywhere without the support of others. And so there are a lot of people out there who are working hard to do good, and for me this is such a great source of optimism. All that we have to do is to do what we think is right and work hard. And there's nothing that guarantees that that's going to lead to meaningful change, but it's really reassuring to know that there are a lot of people out there doing the same thing, and that if we all fight hard and work together, we might actually achieve justice and make it a more kind society. And so I want to thank you all very much. This is a really tremendous honor, and I'm very gratified, and it's especially wonderful to be honored when it's a homecoming. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. So it's my great privilege to present Stanford Law School's National Public Service Award for this year to Judge Patricia Wald. This annual award honors an attorney whose career has demonstrated outstanding commitment to public service and social justice, and who embodies the tradition of public service that we seek to develop in all of our students here at Stanford Law School. I had the honor of working for Judge Wald as her law clerk at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague, and so it's a particular pleasure for me to be here tonight to present the award. They also told me not to pick up the award, so it's not just you. So I was told to gesture to the award here. We're pleased to present this award to Judge Wald, whose career has now spanned more than 60 years. She graduated from Yale Law School in 1951. And what's remarkable about her career is not just the number of firsts. First woman on the DC circuit, first woman to be chief judge of that circuit, and so forth. But the many and varied ways in which she has served the public interest and contributed to justice throughout her remarkable career. In preparing my remarks tonight, I spent some time reading some of Judge Wald's own writings about her career and about public interest in the law. And one quote I found describes her view of the law as follows. Quote, "I see the law as a way to translate our most fundamental aspirations and goals for an open and orderly society that treats all people in the community with respect, and as a vehicle in which to move our society and everyone in it to a better place. It doesn't always work out that way in the short run, but I never stop trying." Truer words were never spoken. Not only is Judge Wald still trying to use the law to make the world a better place, but she has succeeded in doing so. Throughout her career, she has contributed to enormous improvements in the law and society, both here in the United States and around the world. Like so many other great leaders, Judge Wald came from humble origins. She was born in Connecticut and raised by a single mother who worked in a factory. And although no one in their family had attended college, her mother was determined that her daughter would receive an education. An excellent student, she won a scholarship to Connecticut College, where she graduated Phi Beta Kappa, first in her class in 1948. Her family background and her own experience working in factories had given her an interest in the way the labor movement had improved the lives of workers and in the field of labor law. She then attended Yale Law School on a scholarship, graduating in the class of 1951. She was one of only 10 or so women in her law school class. In law school, as in everything else, she exceeded as an officer on the Law Journal, and following her graduation, she clerked for Judge Jerome Frank on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. She was the only woman law clerk that year, though, as she's pointed out, not the first, but certainly the only at that time. And then she worked as the only woman associate at the law firm now known as Arnold & Porter. She left full-time practice a month before the first of her 5 children was born, 5 children in 7 years. So as awe-inspiring as a mother as in every other aspect of her life. When her youngest child entered kindergarten, she began to return to part-time work, writing reports for the Department of Justice and nonprofit organizations during the 1960s on issues such as bail reform, crime in the District of Columbia, the causes and prevention of violence, drug abuse, and other legal issues. In 1968, at the beginning of what we really could see as the modern public interest law movement, she joined the New Neighborhood Legal Services in DC as a litigating attorney, and then later worked at the nonprofit Center for Law and Social Policy, where she worked on landmark cases involving children, mental health, and disability rights. She then served as Assistant Attorney General for Legislative Affairs during the Carter administration, once again the first woman to hold this position, before being nominated by President Carter to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit in 1979, where she became the first woman judge, and then the first woman chief judge of that circuit, and indeed still the only woman to have been chief judge of that circuit. During her time on the D.C. Circuit, she authored some 800 opinions on every issue of federal law under the sun, with particularly notable and landmark opinions in issues of administrative law, freedom of information, executive privilege, constitutional rights, and gender equality. The Almanac of the Federal Judiciary, which collects sort of Yelp-style reviews of federal judges, giving lawyers their outlet for whatever their views are of those who question them from the bench, described Judge Wald in her last year on the circuit as brilliant and perhaps the most respected judge on the D.C. Circuit, explaining that she stood out for being one of the, quote, intellectual superstars on the court, which has the reputation of being one of the best circuits in the country. Her D.C. Circuit colleague, Judge Edwards, wrote in a recent tribute that he'd never worked with anyone who was smarter than Patricia Wald, nor have I ever engaged with a more thoughtful, insightful, or humorous person, though he did note that her polite but intense questioning in one case had caused a lawyer to pass out in a dead faint in the courtroom. I believe all of her law clerks, including Larry Marshall, can put themselves in the shoe of that lawyer, because she is one of the nicest human beings you will ever meet, but also one of the smartest and really most intense in terms of her ability to analyze a legal problem. At the point when many federal judges would have been contemplating a more relaxed pace on senior status, time for an occasional round of golf or tennis or a horror movie, as the judge likes to do in her spare time. She likes to go to the movies. Judge Wald instead chose to leave the security of her lifetime appointment on the federal judiciary and instead set off for new horizons at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague, what was then a relatively new institution, one of the first court since the Nuremberg trials that had been formed by the UN to deal with war crimes from the former Yugoslavia. And it was there that I had the great honor of working with her. In The Hague, Judge Wald worked on trials and appeals involving crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes, and made a number of contributions to the evolution of the institution and its jurisprudence. Once again, after leaving the ICTY, many people would have said they'd contributed enough to the world, but instead, Judge Wald has contributed in so many other ways to public service since leaving the ICTY. She serves on the board of many nonprofit foundations, organizations, and entities. In 2004, President George W. Bush appointed her to the President's Commission on U.S. Intelligence Capabilities Regarding Weapons of Mass Destruction, which issued a report evaluating the intelligence and policy decisions leading to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. More recently, she served on the boards of the Open Society Justice Initiative, as a member of the American Society of International Law Task Force on the International Criminal Court, the Advisory Board of the Coalition for the International Criminal Court, the Constitution Project Guantanamo Task Force, many Bar Association programs, and others. And because justice, or at least the judge never sleeps, she was confirmed by the U.S. Senate this August as a member of the new Federal Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which will analyze and review actions the executive branch takes in connection with terrorism policies to ensure that they're balanced against the need to ensure civil liberties and privacy. Finally, and more personally, let me say that Judge Wald is an inspiration to me, and I know to many other younger women lawyers. Decades after all the female firsts, there are still far too few women in the highest levels of the legal profession, and fewer still who've managed to combine that level of professional development with motherhood. Judge Wald's career shows that while balance may not be possible each and every day, she has confessed to me that she let her children watch the Mickey Mouse Club and eat TV dinners, which makes me feel quite a bit better about my own parenting. Over the span of a long career in the law, it's possible to be both a good mother and to contribute to the public sphere and to the world beyond one's home. And that it's important to do so because our public institutions need to reflect the diverse life experiences of women as well as men. Nothing made that clearer to me than the trials on which Judge Wald sat in The Hague. Some of the charges in those trials involved claims, allegations of systematic wartime rape, a historically under-prosecuted crime. And at trial, some of the defendants sought to misuse the right of cross-examination to intimidate the women who were testifying against them. And it was Judge Wald's presence on the bench in that courtroom, not just as a woman judge, but a woman judge of tremendous professional stature, widely regarded as the best judge on the court, that put a stop to that kind of behavior and ensured a fair trial for all participants, fair for the defendants who were allowed ample opportunity to present their cases properly, but also fair for the victims, and achieved a justice that would not have been possible without such a remarkable judge there. It's hard to describe Judge Wald without resorting to cliched superlatives, and she'll probably scold me over the dessert course for embarrassing her, but she's everything that one could ever hope for in a judge. Fair, wise, brilliant, hardworking, compassionate. Funny. For the students in the audience, if even 1/10 of you do 1/10 as much as Judge Wald has done in her career to advance the cause of justice, then the world will be a far better place in the future when you retire than it is now. But if you really want to follow in her footsteps, you won't ever retire. You won't ever stop seeking justice because the pursuit of justice is not a job or a career, but, as a previous speaker said, a calling, a fundamental way of looking at the world that never stops. It's thus with admiration, awe, and affection that I reflect on Judge Wald's contributions to the law and proudly present her with Stanford's National Public Interest Award.
Thank you, Jenny. Once a loyal law clerk, always a loyal law clerk. That's one thing I really was pretty good at, witness Professors Marshall and Martinez. Now, I'm very honored and grateful indeed to receive the Levin Center's National Public Service Award. But I will admit to some surprise after my initial great pleasure at the notion that what has seemed to me often a 60 years cascade of unplanned events, lucky breaks, and profound disappointments, futile causes, and unexpected breakthroughs should in others' eyes look like a purposeful public service career. But it did set me to thinking which parts of my multifarious work life deserved so respectful a designation. To wit, what is true public service? As I read so many commendations and obituaries, unfortunately, I do a lot of the latter these days at my age, I'm not always sure that the epitaph writers and the graduation speakers mean the same thing when they use the term public service. Words do, of course, matter, and I think it behooves young people embarking on careers and those who counsel them to think hard about what those public service careers really entail, and whether their definition of public service are too broad or too limiting, and whether their expectations are realistic. Altruism and idealism undiluted by a healthy dose of what President Kennedy called the art of the possible risks ending in frustration. And I certainly don't want to deter anyone from the path of unselfish public service, and I certainly don't have all the answers. But maybe my own experiences over 6 decades of rapidly changing political, legal, and cultural events may provide some grist for their mill or yours, so here goes. My first observation is a definitional one. I found that many people use public service as a synonym for government service, with the implication that if you receive your paycheck or even work free for the government, your work is somehow more productive of the public good than your counterparts in private business or in the professions. Thus, former Attorney General Nick Katzenbach, whom I served under, entreated in his recent great memoir, he said, "I hope young people will have the passion for government I had many years ago and still have. It's, after all, their future that's at stake." But an elderly law professor friend of mine told me recently that for 60 years, he had never contributed a cent to his law school. It's Harvard, not Stanford. Because in his view, Harvard had done nothing to motivate students to go into government service, but rather headed them to Wall Street to exploit their talents for money. Now, given that in his era of the 1940s, lawyering in one of the New Deal alphabet agencies might rationally be considered more in the public interest than working for the corporate and financial giants that brought on the Great Depression. But that presumption didn't necessarily hold through all subsequent administrations. A few years later, in the early 50s, when I graduated from law school, I eschewed government service altogether because we were in the midst of the McCarthy era, and I watched with dismay as some of my classmates were subjected to loyalty board hearings without a semblance of the due process we had learned about in law school, lost their jobs, reputations, often solely on the basis of anonymous informers. So instead, I joined an embryonic firm named Arnold Fortis and Porter, then 11 lawyers, and worked on defending those accused of disloyalty by the government. Now, would I have been performing public service if I joined rather than challenged the government? Subsequent events have presented, I think, similar dilemmas for young lawyers. Now, I yield to none in my admiration for the thousands of government workers who devote their careers to tasks like those that were recently honored by the Partnership for Public Service, such as battling AIDS for children, discerning the cause of air crashes, excuse me, ending homelessness for veterans, fighting international human traffickers. But I've had to ask, is it also public service to manipulate information to drive a country's entry into or prolong wars that are not necessary or defensive, to find novel legal theories to justify enhanced interrogation techniques heretofore officially imposed by the U.S. and international law, to support ingenious theories to uphold insulating financial gains from financial responsibility to the detriment of small mortgage holders or consumers. So for my part, I scrutinize public service commendations with a selective lens, and I make my own decisions about the worthfulness, the worthiness of the subjects and the particular service involved. Several stints in government service, as Jenny mentioned, I'm now a part-time board member of a government civil liberties oversight board, but those stints have taught me that career public servants, although in most cases deservedly lauded for their indispensability to the continuity of governance, can also on occasion pose obstacles to reforms initiated by their shorter-term political appointees seeking change. Career government workers can sometimes preside over institutional cultures that resist needed reforms in the public good in the interests of their own survival. At the same time, they provide a blessed impediment to fraud, incompetence, or illegal acts. They can themselves be corrupted by those they are supposed to regulate. In any administration, there are top-flight agencies and lower-drawer ones. The EPA, the Financial Consumer Protection Agency, compared with the Mineral Management Service that performed so disappointingly in the BP spill. Those are contrasting examples. So working for the government is not a pass key to serving the public. If you go into government, you will still have to make hundreds of individual decisions as to whether what you are doing is really serving the public. So if then public service is not just another name for government service, but means, as I believe it should, genuine service to the public, why should not the definition be made explicitly broader and include those who work productively for the public good in the private sector? In tight economic times, starting a business that provides new jobs, cutting the cost to consumers of necessary products or services, These are vital contributions to a better life for ordinary folk that certainly rival the efforts of many government bureaucrats. And how about the philanthropic donations of private entrepreneurs that finance universities, churches, public service organizations like this one, libraries, medical research, and centers like this one? Just as with government service, of course, you have to pick your spots carefully in the private world. That is, if you aim to transcend wealth accumulation as your principal goal in life. And of course, there are, excuse the non-literary reference, 50 Shades of Grey. I am an inveterate reader across the board. Between the government and the not-for-profit private sectors, including the sui generis world of politics, inhabited by the haves, the wannabes, and the once-weres. Are they public servants? In the broadest sense, they might be eligible, for our democratic government depends on elections, campaigns, debates, voter drives, and it's unrealistic to think we can ever go back to town meetings and candidates who run their own campaigns. Not to say our current overlong, extravagantly financed, and often recklessly negative TV-oriented campaigns cannot be radically changed for the better. But as of now, I think only intrepid graduates are willing to gamble their careers or even their reputations in the boiling cauldron of politics, despite the irrebuttable fact that an elected leader is in an exceptional spot to advance the public good. As I learned in my own 2 forays into electoral campaigns, the somewhat depressing McGovern-Shriver presidential campaign of 1972 and the upbeat, almost otherworldly Obama campaign of 2008, the electoral process can be both demeaning and exhilarating. You get regularly yelled at, taunted, blamed for someone else's mistakes, and chased by dogs. And yet the vital nature of the political apparatus, maybe not the current one, but some kind of one, is undeniable. It may take a village to raise a child, but it takes a militia of field workers to elect a president, governor, or mayor. And the lawyer who can contribute in legitimate ways consonant with his or her own definition of the public interest to the election of a political leader that he or she considers the best for the country, state, or city should be considered to rank high in our esteem, perhaps just as high as the more traditional public servants. But I want to talk about, in my lifetime, one of the most important developments has been the explosive growth of the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and their impact on the formulation and execution of public policy. From our earliest days in America, there have been volunteer organizations ranging from firefighters, auxiliary hospital organizations, to PTAs and better government groups at every level. But the past 50 years have seen those numbers, specialties, and significance accelerate exponentially. We're all familiar with the ACLUs, the Human Rights First, the Open Society Foundation, the American Constitution Society, and the Federalist Society and Justice Watch, and the hundreds, probably thousands of their counterparts. Some are one-issue groups like the environmental NGOs. Others more broadly monitor the government's conduct in areas like privacy, human, civil, or consumer rights. Some develop public policy options, some advocate, and some lobby, even litigate. This third way of trying to serve the public good is a beguiling one. One reason is because NGOs are thought to be free of governmental control, yet they inhabit the same substantive domain as government. Still, you have to be careful in drawing too sharp a distinction between private sector efforts in the public interest and NGOs. That ignores some real-life facts. Although NGOs are nonprofit, except for those who rely solely on membership dues, most NGOs depend heavily for their financial existence, as you know, on foundations or law firms or even corporate funding. Some even take government grants. So they're never completely outside any kind of influence on their priorities. The litigating groups that I worked in particularly are often too small to handle large, complex cases on their own, and they have to pair with or even delegate to the pro bono departments of large law firms substantial participation in major cases. Thankfully, legal ethics do require that lawyers, however affiliated, put their clients' interests first and foremost. In my experience, they generally do. But the relationship is there, and I have known public interest legal organizations forced to bypass litigation-worthy issues when there were just no big law firms around who didn't have potential client conflicts to share the burden. And you have to ask, where would most NGOs be if George Soros or Henry Ford or Andrew Carnegie or their contemporary counterparts had decided never to make money at all, but rather to do nonprofit, hands-on public service themselves for the whole of their own careers? It's a humbling but a troubling thought. I raise these issues only to underscore that any notion of public service that's limited to governmental or even so-called public interest organizations may not make sense in the complex, interrelated society that we now live on. Because in truth, the public service community is an interactive network of government agencies, NGOs, pro bono parts of private practice, and even you academics out there whose work in conducting research, running conferences, and training sessions often closely parallels that of the NGOs. So my modest plea to the award givers, commendation writers, and to the general public is to recognize this broader pool of candidates. Though as in all communities, this one too has its problematic members. There are self-labeled public interest groups which are supported totally or mainly by certain industries or political segments to advance a particular point of view or a specific economic interest. Such groups do qualify for tax exemption under Section 501c4 of the Revenue Code as, quote, social welfare groups, unquote, and their supporters argue that they are just as much public service organizations as the ACLU or the NRDC. The New York Times reported recently on some such groups which proselytize for limited government deregulation, debt reduction, and the like, issues which the government, or at least the IRS, recognizes as, quote, advancing broad community interests. 60 Minutes recently featured Grover Norquist's Taxpayers Reform Group, which secures pledges from congresspersons not to raise taxes under any circumstances and threatens them with political retaliation if they do. Many of these groups spend enormous sums on advertising directly targeted at elections or legislative preference. And the Supreme Court's recent United Citizens case has accorded them great leeway in that regard. Of course, these groups are entitled to legitimate First Amendment protections, though just how far that protection should go is a bigger question for another day, which I'm sure you must debate in your classes. The important thing to remember is that neither the tax authorities nor even the First Amendment's guarantees, whatever their scope, need carry over to our individual judgments as to whom to work for, whom to support, or whose work truly constitutes public service. Public service need not be, in short, an equal opportunity employer, and decisions on what it is and what it is not are in the end matters of personal judgment. So finally, I'd like to discuss briefly two aspects of public service based on my own experience that I think new recruits have to think about. Overall, I feel very lucky for the chance to have participated in so many parts of this public service world. A thoroughly supportive husband made it possible for me not only to have that freedom economically, but a full family life as well. But not everyone is so lucky, and I'm cognizant that jobs in public service, however defined, are scarce these days. So I will share these last two observations, should they become relevant at some stage to any of you along the way. The first is the inevitability of disappointment. So many apparently worthy issues just don't make it in the courts. I'm sure that's true of the legislative and political arenas as well. Now, private lawyers lose cases too, but they usually have the consolation of fairly substantial fees and salaries. But it's not just the win-loss percentage, I think, that haunts so many of the public service types, but a deeper concern, the law of unintended consequences. In my legal service days, we brought and we won path-breaking landlord-tenant cases on new legal theories like the warranty of habitability or protective suits against landlord retaliation for tenant complaints. In the short run, we performed a service for our clients, But for the long run, I had to wonder, did we adequately assess the market consequences of our victories, which would eventually diminish the amount of housing available to poor people as the marginal landlords left the market and sold out to developers who built premium housing totally out of reach for poor people. I don't suggest it was not in the public interest to bring those suits, establishing higher minimum standards for tenancy, just that as public interest lawyers, we were not particularly adept at dealing with the consequences. You may say that was not our job, but whose was it if our aim was to benefit the public good? The same dilemma existed in early public interest law when we brought class actions for deinstitutionalization of mental patients and nonviolent juveniles. The pitiful lack of community resources to care for, and treat those unfortunates on the outside had tragic results for too many of our clients. Again, the law needed to recognize their right to live in the community, but in retrospect, we must ask whether our strategies and our proposed reliefs took sufficient account of how they would do that, and whether we should have done more to mobilize the resources to serve them. Without constituencies to implement legal victories for powerless groups, legal victories produce skewered results. Badly run and abusive group homes for juveniles or the mentally disabled simply perpetuate the oppression of the large institutions that we help dismantle. Lawyers are very good at breaking log jams, but they cannot always control the direction in which the logs roll. While courts can tell other institutions in society to do or not to do specific things, you can't execute juveniles or disabled persons, you can't do body searches on school children without probable cause, you can't let present populations arise above a certain level. They're not so successful in telling those first responders in society how to run a good treatment facility, and most courts, frankly, don't want to even try. Public interest law has yet a ways to go to involve the other organs of society in providing real implementation of court decisions. As it is now, too often the legislators don't appropriate the money, the regulators don't monitor the public facilities, the community groups who will provide supplemental help and monitoring are all too scarce. And I want to point out, I am getting near the end, the scourge of unintended consequences and disappointed expectations is particularly virulent on the international public interest scene. We are continually warned we should not interpose our own values into foreign cultures. But many values, like rejecting impunity for war criminals, have roots in international law and universally accepted human rights, and the international criminal courts were established to vindicate the rights of innocent victims, mostly women and children, to be free of heinous crimes committed outside the laws of war. Thus, while serving on the ICTY, I heard hundreds of Bosnian Muslim witnesses over a 2-year period testify as to the inhumane incarceration, beatings with rubber hoses and cable wires, near starvation, and sexual abuse at the hands of their Serb captors in a prison camp called Omarska, located in a mining complex in northwestern Bosnia. It was compared by on-the-scene journalists to the odious Nazi concentration camps. We convicted 5 Serbian commanders and guards at Omarska of war crimes and crimes against humanity, including torture. After the hostilities ended, the site of the camp was scheduled to house a memorial to the thousands of prisoners who suffered there, to be financed by an international metal company who bought the mining complex. But alas, quote, under pressure from hardcore Serbian denialists, unquote, and especially the insistence of the Serb mayor of a neighboring town, who claimed, despite hundreds of factual findings by 2 international courts to the contrary, that Omarska was little more than what he called a transit and interrogation center, the memorial was suspended and public access to the site limited to 1 day a year. Flat-out denial of the camp remains widespread on the scene journalists write. Unfortunately, Omarska is the rule, not the exception. Even at Srebrenica, ruled by the ICTY, another case in which I sat, as a genocide, survivors and relatives of the 8,000 young men murdered within a week, fleeing from a UN-protected enclave, attempts by former residents to return or to establish some kind of memorial have been turned back by jeers and taunts. History will, we hope, right these wrongs in time, but international public service in the here and now requires patience and a far-sighted lens. None of this, as I emphasize, is meant to minimize the wonderful highs as well as the very lows that do come from successfully moving the forces of society toward a better life for all or even parts of the public that can't do it on their own. In Justice Brandeis's words, the important thing is to keep fighting. I would add, fighting but with strategy, foresight, and realistic expectations. One of my own favorite quotes is from a civil rights movement commentator who said, "Small acts of protest are not wasted. Silent individuals sometimes begin to speak, and feeble organizations may grow formidable. Invisible connections happen. The resources are already there, and at certain times in history, exactly when we cannot know, great movements for justice break forth and the world changes. Up to now, only modestly, erratically, but the future may hold surprises. The past did." Now, finally, in all this, as you can see, I've been placing a high value on an individual's own sense of where public good lies in evaluating the worth of his or her own work as well as that of others. I see no other course unless we do cede our compasses and our consciences to majority political or cultural norms. But I also recognize that certain jobs demand a definition of public good that transcends the immediate results of a decision in the interests of a longer-term value that's essential to democratic government, such as the rule of law or preservation of personal freedom. Let me use judges, surprise, as an example. Most people would agree that judges do perform public service, certainly the ones that live up to their ethical requirements of competence, fairness, and independence. No time here to go into the elusive question of what judicial independence really means. But the public good most judges strive to advance cannot be our own personal notions of what a philosopher king would do in the immediate situation. Rather, it has to be what the law, whether it's the Constitution, a statute, or precedent, has resolved to be the public good, unless that law is fundamentally flawed or unjust, not just for these litigants, but in its basic conception for the whole community. Often judges don't agree privately with the resolution dictated by the law that binds us in individual cases, but we do stay within its limits for the higher good of a rational, predictable rule of law under a separation of powers systems. Sometimes in the short run, we do genuine harm by an ordinary person's standards when we enforce general laws in a way that hurts specific people or find that an obviously injured plaintiff simply hasn't made out his case on evidence cognizable in a court of law. Judges, by way of their interpretive powers, can try to bring individual justice into line with longer-term values, but that takes a lot of effort, I can tell you, and sometimes it just doesn't work. In a well-known asbestos case in which I sat that went all the way up to the Supreme Court and back down again, the victim's family tried to sue the manufacturer of the product, which allegedly caused his death, but the letter they submitted in defense of summary judgment that identified his employer in the product had not been made under oath and affidavit form, and it was too late now that he was dead, so the case went up and down the judicial system for years before, in a split decision by our court, the case was finally allowed to survive summary judgment. But sometimes that doesn't work, and a judge can do nothing but howl, as where under mandatory minimum sentencing laws, he is required to commit a first-time low-level drug offender, aged 25 years, to 60 years in prison, more than most murderers would serve. In extreme cases, judges can recuse themselves or resign rather than execute what they believe are profoundly unjust laws or ones that violate the most basic human rights. The German judges who enforced the Nazi regime's anti-Jewish laws were held responsible at Nuremberg. Some critics have even suggested our own pre-Civil War judges should also have been held to account. So even for those of you who will sometimes sit as judges, there's no way ever to isolate yourself totally from your own responsibility to define public service and the public good. So I'm going to wind up there and not try to sum up all the very impressive things that have been said tonight, but just wish you all Godspeed in your own individual searches for that elusive public good that we all seek to serve. And thank you again for this wonderful award. If I might add, if Jenny can't lift, I'm certainly not going to try. Thank you.
One of the greatest blessings of my life, as you can imagine, was the privilege of spending a year with that beacon of justice and wisdom and intensity and passion and commitment. And Jenny spoke about the inspiration that Judge Wald has been to so many women. I came into my clerkship having gone through an entire 3 years of law school without ever having had a female professor. My entire undergraduate education, for reasons we won't go into now, it was unthinkable that there would have been a female professor, and Judge Wald was that very first mentor, that very first beacon showing me what it really meant to think of women in the way that obviously one must, and she so irrevocably proves. Another one of the great prides of my life is being here at Stanford at an institution that has shown the intensity of the commitment it has shown to making sure that we promote and nourish our students' desire to engage in public interest and public service across any number of spectra. Diane said that David Sapp was her child in the first class. Actually, David Sapp was my child as well, I think. It was the first year that I arrived. You know, success has 1,000 parents. Failure is an orphan. David, you're no failure and no orphan. But the fact is, law school so often is accused, often rightly, of bringing in students with such passion as reflected in those essays for using their skills toward that calling that Miles Rubin described, and then spending at least a semester, sometimes a year, sometimes 3 years, extinguishing that passion. Everything you thought you came to law school for is basically pummeled out of you. And that is a risk, and it happened historically to so many, but no one can suggest that that's what Stanford Law School is about. No one can suggest that what Diane Chin has built in the Levin Center is anything but the opposite, anything but this great safe harbor for those who want a sense of community and a sense of mission and a sense of recognition that their goals are goals that I would even call holy goals, goals that we stand behind not only in the way we talk, but in our economic support. The commitment that we make to that cadre of students. And what you've seen as reflected in Judge Wald's remarks tonight, one of the takeaways that I hope you leave here with is the broad spectrum of different people and ways that you've been shown that people can contribute to the public interest. You've heard from Miles Rubin, who's gone into a life of business and yet has done more to promote the public interest than virtually any lawyer who's engaged full-time in that practice that I can imagine. And for those for whom that makes sense, we shouldn't suggest that that's anything short of a deep commitment to public interest. The John and Terry Levin have done it not through business, but through private sector practice, and that too can be a holy endeavor when done ethically with a commitment to giving back. And of course, you've heard from David Sapp, who works in an NGO, and you heard from Jenny Martinez, who works in academics, and you've heard from Judge Wald with an array of careers in public interest. There are so many roads here to promote a sense of justice, but what I hope you walk away from tonight with is a recognition that there is wealth here. There is a feeling of accomplishment and not just an illusion, but a meaningful sense of accomplishment that is deeper, that is richer than anything one can possibly do just by the accumulation of wealth that Judge Wald referenced. So I hope for the first years in particular, for whom I know this first few weeks can be somewhat, wow, did I do the right thing? Have I come to the right place? Did I really, do I really need to spend this much time thinking about service of process under 4B-E1? The answer to that is yes, you do. But I hope you walk away with this truly inspired to recognize that there are heroes in this profession. There are so many jokes, but there are so many heroes. Take pride in them, and as David said, walk humbly. With all of her accomplishments, Judge Wald didn't say this. One of her roles in the Obama campaign was to go door to door in Iowa, knocking on strangers' doors. That's what it means to walk humbly with your God. Godspeed, as Judge Wald says.